All right, if you can tell me your name and your title, please.
Yeah, Mark Owens, Associate Professor of Political Science at UT Tyler.
Perfect. Dr. Owens, we're going to start with just a basic question. What is the state of the governor's race right now here in Texas?
Yeah. So the governor's race in Texas is catching a lot of, in particular, national attention because it appears closer than it's ever been before. You have Governor Abbott's lead over Beto O'Rourke in the last 4 polls tends to look like it's at 5%, maybe 6%. The big change of this was that back in February, he held an 11% lead. And one of the things we know about politics is that you can't necessarily just take half of a lead and then half of a lead. It gets harder and harder to do so. But just the ability for Beto O'Rourke and Governor Abbott to show that they could both raise more than $25 million in the last 3 months is incredible, and is going to show that this race has started off early compared for normal Texas standards.
I think if you would have asked people maybe a year ago about the governor's race, Beto versus Abbott, they probably would have said, oh, there's really no chance that Beto has a shot at this. But looking at these latest polls, you're right. Now it seems like, oh, he might actually have a shot at this. What's happening? What's causing Beto to close the gap with the governor?
Yeah, I think that right now, it's fair to say that generally the public, there's a lot of stress, just in general, right? And the question is, where do you point it? Do you point it to a governor, or do you point it to the federal government, right, and the president? So one of the things that has occurred from this is a really big battle between independents who don't have sort of a partisan base to frame that perspective, right, that they want to protect their leader and cast blame on the other. So for right now, that's a big part of Beto's opportunity, is to just show that he's an alternative to the status quo, and that the status quo isn't what maybe it was 4 years ago. And this is going to be a contrast that Governor Abbott is going to remind us that the economy is doing well in Texas compared to the federal or national level, and that there are a number of things that he's done right in order to bring companies to the state and help with jobs. So it's a big moment that right now they're not going to argue on the same thing. There's some kind of counterpoints that might not sync between what each candidate says.
11 points in February, 5 points now. What kind of effect do you think Uvalde has had on the race? Do you think that's been a big factor?
So that was this moment, like a focal point that put Beto O'Rourke and Greg Abbott on the same page of the same issue. And they took different sides, right? One wanting to add gun regulations and the other wanting to protect schools, right, and not increase gun regulations. So that is a moment which again sort of lets us see both candidates in the same issue and compare them. And that is a big reason why you've seen that. That if there are any other tragedies, that's something that just hurts the leader, regardless of who the leader is. And it lets the challenger kind of talk about what they would do instead, right? And give a plan of why you would vote for them.
Let's talk about the effect of the president on this race, right?
Yeah.
President Biden's approval numbers are in the tank. They're terrible approval numbers, right? It's a midterm year. We're expecting Democrats to lose big. We're expecting Republicans to win big, right? How do you think that's going to have an effect on the governor's race here in Texas? How will Beto also be able to get ahead of that, right? Being gobbled up by this red wave that they're saying is impending.
I think one of the interesting things about Texas and sort of interviewing Texans is that there's a moment where people might see themselves as Texan more than American in that case, but really I think the moment of that kind of comparison is that Beto O'Rourke is not seen as tied to Joe Biden. He didn't take a job in the administration, right? He, in fact, on Super Tuesday, when Joe Biden won in Texas after coming off of the South Carolina win, it was through Beto O'Rourke's endorsement with Amy Klobuchar, right? So Beto's part of a story on how Joe Biden became popular in Texas as a guy from Delaware. And I think that there's some trust that he holds that among Texans that and independents that President Biden might not have because of not having a relationship.
I want to talk about their strategy.
Yeah.
The former congressman is going all around Texas. I mean, let's talk about East Texas specifically here. Yesterday he was in Pittsburgh. He's in Longview today. He's going to be in Palestine as well today. He's also going down to Deep East Texas in Hemphill, right? Is that what he needs to do to get closer? Like, what is the strategy? Like, what, for both of them, how do they win the governor's race?
Yeah, this is a strategy that he's using that other people have not. One, it's important because he's going to visit 65 different locations that look like these places in East Texas or in West Texas, largely with the fact of, I think like he did running 4 years ago, stop and listen, right? I think you can almost expect that he might even take this kind of trip again and visit, but he wants first to understand how to communicate with people in East Texas and talk about what their needs are instead of reading about it right secondhand. So those stories are interesting because his strategy is to take one story from a community and then tell it in the next community, right, and build a connection. And that is important when he talks about the fact that there's these places that a Democrat has not visited since Lyndon Johnson, and he's doing it. He's really trying to say, I'm the person who can listen to you, bring us together. And it's a challenge, right? It's not necessarily the places that Governor Abbott is going to either. But they have enough population centers that maybe he can get votes for himself.
I want to go back to the issues real quick that are affecting this race. You also help conduct polls, right?
Yeah.
What are the issues this year here in Texas that people are really, mostly concerned about that are having an impact on this race?
Yeah. I think this race is impacted by the fact that there's uncertainty on what are the legal framework about the availability of abortions and the restrictions of not being allowed to have one. And secondly, the thought is about our border security. And that's something that both candidates will talk about, whether it's border security on the fact of keeping people secure or not, no entry at all. But I think both candidates are actually talking about other options, right? Moving away from Donald Trump on the fact of we need to be caring of the individuals who are coming across the border as well. So both candidates going to talk about the border because it's a salient topic and people understand that there should be no loss of life for anyone coming across. At the same time, right, Texas is a welcoming place. They're just going to define how welcoming a little bit differently. And I think that that's where O'Rourke is going to talk about it because he's from a border community. The next case that's going to exist from this is just because of Uvalde ends up with guns. One of being protectionist, right? The other being looking for progressive reforms.
Ann Richards was
Yeah.
the last Democratic governor. Does the former congressman actually have a chance here in Texas?
Yeah.
Just to put it bluntly, does he have a chance?
Yeah. So his chance really rests in the fact that Texas today is not like Texas in the 1990s and the 1980s. The fact that Democrats now have the ability to elect Democrats in the largest cities, which when Ann Richards won, they were electing Republicans. And so you think about this opportunity for him to see, again, like Ann Richards sort of was a national Democrat who had a Texas style. He's pointing to the fact of also being someone who can translate what Texas needs to the national level. And that's the narrow or slim opportunity, but I think that this is the lane that he has of a populism message on the fact of, hey, I'm here for you. I'm going to bring the public's voice into government is a strategy that he's using. He's using it with a smile, somewhat differently than we've sometimes seen populism used recently, but it's the same approach, right? I'm one of you, let me lead you.
A last question for you. Who would you rather be right now in the governor's race? Would you prefer to be the governor right now and be in his spot or the former congressman's?
It's a great question on the fact of, do you like to be the risk taker? Like Beto O'Rourke is taking risks, and I think he's going to get a lot of adrenaline from this. And then the fact of, right, for Governor Abbott, he has the strength, he has the name recognition everywhere in Texas, which is what Beto's trying to build. Yet he has the high expectations. He's won this office 2 times already, right? The expectation for a long time was he's never won an election by less than 14%. And so, he really thinks about this case of it's getting closer, and that's a moment where I think Governor Abbott feels good about his chances of winning, but he knows that he can't take this lightly. And that is a great point about the strong challenge that Beto O'Rourke is putting together by getting money from Texans, right, from out-of-state support, all still channeled in a focused message of let Democrats have leadership in Texas. And Governor Abbott is the central leader of the Republicans, right, of Texas right now. And he's getting some national pushback because he has as a Republican, the largest constituency of anybody in America since Joe Biden is president. And we have Gavin Newsom in California. So,
Dr. Owens, thank you very much for
Yeah.
joining us this morning.
it was great to be with you, Isaac.